that you know very well what's going on. But in order to find out once more as an adult, you have to become again as a child. So what does that involve? It means, ladies and gentlemen, would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? First of all your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly, because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it.
Many people are well aware that this egocentric consciousness is a hallucination, and that they presume it's the function of religion to change it, because that's what the Zen Buddhists and yogis and all these people in the Orient are doing. They're changing their state of consciousness to get something called satori, or mystical experience, or nirvana, or moksha, or what have you. And everybody around here is really enthused about that, because you don't get that in church. I mean, there have been Christian mystics, but the church has been very quiet about them. But in the average church, all you get is talk. There's no meditation, no spiritual discipline. They tell God what to do interminably, as if he didn't know. And then they tell the people what to do, as if they could or even wanted to. And then they sing religious nursery rhymes. As Claire Booth Luce put it, not to be a pun, but she said, it's no longer possible to practice contemplative prayer at Mass, because you're being advised, exhorted, edified all the time. And it becomes a bore. Think of God listening to all those prayers. Talking about grieving the Holy Spirit. It's just awful. People have no consideration for God at all.
All right, today I'm joined here with Arabella Thais. Arabella Thais is a writer, philosopher, speaker, and host of the phenomenal Sacred Wisdom podcast. To be honest, you make me a little nervous. You're deeply intellectual and quick-witted and scary smart with like a raw intensity and inspirational passion. But you seem like you really channel that intensity beautifully, very creatively giving rise to your artistic expressions, and it's evident that there's no denying that you definitely have an artistic, poetic, deeply intellectual, and brilliant mind. So this is all to express both my admiration as well as a feeling of slight intimidation. So with that, is there anything that you want to add about yourself for the listeners in terms of yourself or your background?
Thank you so much for everything you just said. I am so humbled and honored and touched to receive such incredibly high praise. And I don't take such rhapsodies lightly. Truly, that means a great deal to hear that. And so thank you. And you don't need to be intimidated, because I think, my intention is certainly not to intimidate anyone. Do you know what I mean? So I'm very much coming from a space like we're having a conversation now. This is your podcast. And I'm not intimidated, but I'm definitely a little nervous and to be on someone else's podcast, because usually I'm the one asking the questions, and there's a certain amount of vulnerability that comes with being on the receiving end. So I trust you, and please don't be intimidated.
So you do these amazing spoken word pieces, and I think that it's an added or complementary benefit that you have such a captivating voice. If you may, I would love to kind of open this up with one of your spoken word writings. If you could kind of do that to set the stage, I think that would be really great.
Thank you so much. Yes. So I'm going to read this one, which I've called I Believe in Better. From the womb till the tomb, we will walk this earth together, and together we must weather the storm that is raging. Amazing possibilities exist if only we could capitalize on this, but it is a crisis of consciousness that we are facing. Yes, a lack of direction, an abyss of meaning. So isn't it time then that we started leaning into the mystery, into the enchanted entanglement of our prehistory, into the unsolved riddle at the heart of our story, the question of why we are here? You see, in this post-enlightenment generation, we have the illusion of separation because society has lost touch with the miracle of creation and the power of a cosmic creator. What are we waiting for then? The planet is silently suffocating, and we are annihilating ourselves. As we delve deeper into the matrix of profit and consumption, transaction and dysfunction, the inaction cannot go on. So tell me, aren't you feeling existential dissatisfaction rumbling in the belly of your being? And aren't you having an allergic reaction to the bullshit that you're seeing as people continue to gossip and compare, and millions of others continue to suffer and starve and die in despair? I guess the question is then, how do we repair the wounds that we bear within? Perhaps it begins with being heard. Perhaps it begins with offering a word to acknowledge how we abolished and demolished peoples and cultures, how the age of empire is at fault for what it did on the land that we stand on right now. You see, our history books have silenced the violence and our violation of the First Nations, and how we decided to genocide the indigenous tribes that lived on the land that we now call our own. Those people called this land sacred, but we said it's ours for the taking, just like the metaphorical raping of Mother Earth, still wrought through those big corporations that plunder the oil and desecrate the soil, Monsanto more like Monsatan. And please, don't give me new age bullshit that money's just energy, that it signifies plenitude and plenty. Yes, but don't forget it is also etched with debt and deficit, with human suffering for those who don't have it. So you may speculate to accumulate, but have you ever taken a moment to just ruminate on what it's like for others less fortunate than yourselves? And don't get me started on how women are treated, on how we are still suppressed and silenced and beaten, while our voices are pleading to be heard. Because the sad thing is that in so many cultures, misogyny is the progeny of the system. It is a tyrannical sickness, a festering abscess that tells girls they were born less than their brothers. And we forget about the mothers who birthed us all, about the goddess within us who stands tall, who is brave and fierce and strong, because we have forgotten to whom and what we belong. We have lost the song of the cosmos, the unheard music written in the stars. Instead, we focus on cigars and fast cars, and the tapestry of humanity is like a broken mirror of shattered glass. But I believe in better. I believe in a world unfettered, and I believe in the power of words and letters to help free us from the chains that hold us down. Yes, I believe in our potential, that maybe things could go well for us if we tried. So the time has come for us to surrender deeply and completely, ever so sweetly, to the evolutionary pulse of the universe. Because this life is an artwork, a poem made from free verse. It is up to us how it is written. We just can't keep sitting, pretending that we don't have any power while we cower in a corner afraid. Because if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? It begins with the individual, with the mystical enlightenment of the personal consciousness in this ever originating eternal present, because this current moment is heaven sent. This, my friends, is the journey of the soul. And when we understand this, we will become whole.
Wow, that's absolutely beautiful. Um, I'm hoping that at some point you can release an amazing audiobook with some of this stuff and I hope that you do it yourself with your own voice.
Thank you so much. I felt bad. I was aware that that was quite long, so I hope I haven't bored your listeners.
I could listen all day. Um, so yeah, absolutely beautiful. I feel like we definitely align a lot in terms
Mm-hmm.
of exploring the areas or inquiry into the nature of internal and external reality and our perceptions and conceptions of beingness itself. And you're all about education. That you've made that clear. And I'm with you 100%. I feel knowledge transmission and education can really solve a lot of the disharmonies in the world by spreading awareness in an effective and empowering way, such as the ways in which you're going about it. Especially in something as seemingly cut and dry as language itself. I'm always discovering new and interesting things about words. I've come to find that words I thought I had a pretty solid understanding of originally actually have a much deeper and richer conceptual history than originally meets the eye, that can greater inform interpretations and understandings and overall perception with engaging in any conversation or communication for that matter. It's often the case that in conversations, two people can be using the same word but both attach different meanings.
Mm-hmm.
In the exploration of vocabulary, it's like instead of just seeing, for example, green, you're able to see the many nuances and possibilities that exist within green, all the different shades and the whole spectrum that can help you kind of intuit plausible meanings of what's being conveyed. And so, on this note of words and terminology, something that you write about New Age platitudes and
Yeah, yeah.
the liberation thereof, and the inclination towards a new paradigm. And I'm curious, firstly, as to what your conception or understanding is of this New Ageism, and what it means to you when someone is what it means to you when someone is saying New Age, and what it may entail, and how it may hinder human progression, and
Mm-hmm.
what is the kind of paradigm shift that you feel is important to focus on and aim towards that moves beyond these New Age platitudes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I love that question. I think that's a really fertile question. There's a couple of things I did just want to say in response to how you couched that question with regards to words and language. One of the reasons I love the English language so much is we have one of the most extensive vocabularies of any language, and the precision of meaning available to us is phenomenal. And that's why I use the words that I do, because there is such semantic precision with the English language that you can choose a word that it has, like, the meaning is so exact. There is like no two ways about how it can be interpreted. Having said that, I totally understand what you mean. Is that this is about the gulf of understanding, as we're all in these individual bodies having our own individual experience. And don't we all just so desperately want to be understood? And I've experienced that so many times in my life where I've said one thing and someone's interpreted another because they've projected their stuff onto me, and vice versa. So yes, of course, words are inherently limited. Limited. The ultimate kind of higher dimensions of reality are above language. Secondly, you mentioned about the color green. That's one of those famous philosophical things about colors. None of us know whether the other person's experiencing the same thing. I don't know. I assume you do when I look at whatever, a beautiful sunset, that what I'm experiencing, you are experiencing the same. We don't actually know. Now, with regards to the question about the new age thing, yeah, so I think you've drawn that from my website, where I'm kind of addressing the fact that there's such a thing as new age platitudes, and that this isn't necessarily helpful for the ultimate progression of humanity. Yeah, so I mean, like, if you actually look at what the New Age is and what it represents, there's a ton of stuff that I really agree with, right? You know, it was a cultural movement. It was a zeitgeist that emerged in the 1970s, obviously after this, the initial movement of psychedelic exploration. And, you know, a lot of stuff was coming from the East towards the West. And there was this huge influx in higher consciousness, shall we say, in a way that was really, really staggering. You know, you have Woodstock, you have this hippie movement, peace and love. And Ralph Abraham, who's sort of someone I've spoken to a couple of times and has been very supportive of my research. He is a mathematician who's very involved in chaos theory, and he spoke with Terence McKenna and Rupert Sheldrake kind of back in the day. So he described what was happening in the 60s and 70s as almost like a wobble in the space-time fabric for what's happening now, actually. So I sort of see the New Age as that. I think there's a lot of really good things about it. Now, the reason I say that it's become platitudinous, now, is that I feel like it just, as a sort of whole, like the nomenclature New Age, it just has zero credibility. Like it's not, it's lost, you know, rightly or wrongly, to even speak of the New Age. That terminology is so laden now with like fluff. And there was also a lot of voices, I think, in the space kind of coming out, saying stuff that was basically completely not corroborated and like wildly speculative, but not speculative in the way that string theory is speculative in a way that's just kind of really detached from reality. And I think we do need to honor and respect who we are, where we came from, and the lineage and tradition that we're based, like that's given us so much massive advancement, which is materialism. And I know we'll talk about this later because I have very strong opinions on the materialist paradigm. But at the same time, that like it is accredited. And there's scientists who've spent their whole lives like doing experiments and doing stuff that's rigorous and academic. And that's why, you know, I've encountered people who've said to me, you don't need to do a PhD, you da 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 da. And I'm like, well, actually I do, because not only do I want to more than anything, the rigor, the thoroughness that is entailed in academic research is unparalleled. And I think there's just too much stuff in the New Age movement and whatever remnants exist today that aren't substantiated. They're not like as intelligent or as comprehensive as they could be. But that's not to write off the whole thing. And I also know, you know, I was just living in Costa Rica for 2.5 years, and I mean, it was so amazing. There was a lot of people out there who kind of fall into this very like cliched New Age sort of demographic of people talking about the fifth dimension and we're all going to ascend. And it's like, do you guys even have any concept of what mathematical dimensions are? Like, no, you don't. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what are you talking about? Or they'll reference the observer effect. They don't even realize that the observer effect doesn't entail a human consciousness, doesn't need to. They'll just reference things incorrectly. And it's like, don't talk about stuff you don't understand. I don't. There's a shit ton of stuff out there I do not understand, and that's way beyond my remit because I didn't study quantum physics. You know, I studied English literature, but so I think, yeah, that's probably gives you a good overview of what I mean by the New Age platitudes.
Yes. And you mentioned chaos and chaos theory. I would love for you, if you could, to describe and elaborate on chaos and chaos theory as you've come to be familiar with it and how it informs your understanding of reality.
Yeah. So again, in lieu of what I just said about not speaking of that which I don't understand, I'll tell you as much as I do understand about chaos theory. And I'll try and convey it in, you know, simple terms as possible, because this is a branch of mathematics and it can get incredibly complex. Sort of simply speaking, chaos theory is the study of underlying patterns hidden in ostensible chaos. Okay, and it's looking at often dynamic systems. So a dynamic system is any sort of behavior that's in motion. That could be like, you know, behavior of people within families, or the motion of water within a pipe, and often things that, you would expect to be completely random, chaotic, and unpredictable, that's what kind of chaos means in this context, actually are governed by deterministic laws that pull them into a coherent pattern, even if like on the surface it looks random. So I'll give you an example, like with a tap, a tap of water. If you turn it a little bit so that there's a drip of water coming out, that first turn, the drip of water will be it'll be ordered, it'll be coherent, it'll be drip, drip, drip. Now, the moment you turn the tap a little bit more, it suddenly becomes a chaotic and disordered pattern. It's unpredictable. However, chaos theory, if you actually like you record the number of drops that have come out, you record the amount of times, you will see in what seems to be chaos and actually a hidden order, there are patterns beneath what sounds to our ears and what looks like to us complete unpredictable chaos. So yeah, and then another thing to mention with chaos theory is the idea of attractors. So these are states or points that are pulling systems, dynamic systems, which I've just mentioned towards them. Okay, so it's like in this, you're looking at this chaos, but there being all these chaotic points in a dynamic system are actually being pulled towards something, towards a state of unity. So there's like a kind of much deeper order within that which appears to be unpredictable and chaotic. So it's about paradox, right? Because chaos and determinism are paradoxical. Something's determined, that means there's an order to it, right? It's inherently ordered, it's predetermined, but chaos is about it being disordered.
Yeah. So, is there such thing as true randomness in your estimation, or no?
I believe not. That's up for philosophical debate. Okay, and this is now yeah, I do not believe in randomness. I absolutely don't.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of underlying patterns and chaos, I don't know if this is relative. You're pretty open about your bipolar diagnosis, and I don't know a whole lot about it. My best understanding, I guess, is that it revolves around maybe flipping to like opposite extremes of emotional or mental states very quickly or often, or something along those lines. But I'm very interested in understanding things from your perspective. Maybe what you have learned about it for yourself, or how you manage it, or also I can't help but think I may be wrong, but it may also lend a great deal to the beauty of your expression and how you kind of so courageously spill out your expressions with such depth and passion. But I don't know. Tell me a little bit about it and what it's like, if you
It
could.
definitely is a kind of spilling out. That's it's funny you say that. That's often how it feels, like a sort of kind of vomiting out of my internal landscape. I'm really, really, really glad you asked this question, and thank you, because I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about it, that I want to put straight and that I want to explore. First of all, several people, like more than several people, have said to me when I've told them I have bipolar, have said to me without even knowing me, no, you don't. If you have bipolar, I have bipolar, and we all have bipolar. It's like, well, no, we don't all have bipolar, just like we don't all have multiple personality syndrome, and we don't all have ADD, and we don't all have schizophrenia. And I'm coming from a place where I fully understand the limitations of putting a psychiatric label on a person. I obviously understand the limitations in that, but at the end of the day, there are symptoms, recurrent symptoms, that allow a psychiatrist to say, actually, you fall into the category of this, and your experience of life is beyond the range of what would be otherwise considered normal. Okay, so bipolar corresponds to that. It's about you're having an experience of life that the average person, most of the populace, is not having that. They're not experiencing that. And what does that look like? That looks like mood swings, I think, really simply, like your mood oscillating beyond the bandwidth of other people in a way that's very disproportionate to what's going on around you. You're basically really sensitive. That's another way of putting it. It's like hypersensitive. I am hypersensitive to my environment, to beauty, whether I'm surrounded by nature and beauty. I can't physically be in ugly places, like places that don't have light and space and nature. I know maybe that sounds sort of like a facetious or frivolous thing to say. I'm not joking. Like I know what kind of environment I have to be in. That's why I left to live in the jungle. So it's like I'd rather be in a little shack on a beautiful beach in, verdant nature than have bricks 10 feet from my window in London. So yeah, I guess that's in simple terms what bipolar is. Another way that my psychiatrist explained it to me when he first diagnosed me was that if you imagine a mood scale, like 1 being so low that you want to take your own life, and 10 being so high that you think you're Jesus Christ, like you're delusionally high. People with bipolar are going to be swinging from more like, a 2 to an 8. That might be in the same day. That's called rapid cycling. It might be you have a few months very, 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 very low, and then like a few weeks really high. It's different for everyone. But that was certainly my experience. Is I've had, suicidally low depressions, to the point where I cannot see a way out. I literally, everything that I behold around me is just riven with pain, darkness, despair, and density. I feel completely alone, and the pain is visceral. I think this is how it differs also, for me anyway, with what one might call more classical clinical depression. People who tend to suffer from depression, I often hear that they get, numb, they feel numb, they have no feelings. That's not my experience. I've never felt that. It's always been pain. It's been active, violent pain. The kind of pain that's often led me to cut my own arms, bash my head against the wall to knock myself out, bite into my skin till I bleed because I don't know how to channel the energy. It's very visceral, it's very expressive, it's very explosive. And then you flip that on its head for the ecstasy and the high, it's the same. Now, there's category of bipolar. Bipolar 1 is when it's more extreme, so they're more likely to have delusions. Yeah, like maybe auditory hallucinations, or they get delusional about who they are. So they might actually think they are like the prophet, right? And they, complete delusions of grandiosity. That's like closer to the schizophrenia sort of spectrum because they're cousins of each other. And actually my brother has schizophrenia. So but I don't have that. I would never get like that. And I know because I've been off and on medication, that's just not my experience. For me, it's about the lack of emotional regulation. Yeah, the lack of ability to control what I convey. It's like, rage. If there's like deep unhealed, unresolved trauma, and it's being triggered in a way that I perceive as to be unjust, or I'm not being heard, I might not be able to cope with the intensity of emotions I feel inside. What does that look like? Throwing glasses on the floor, screaming. I mean, I freak people out. I freak my mum out. I freak my best friends out. They've seen some gnarly shit. And that's why it pisses me off when I meet people and they say, if you have bipolar, I have bipolar. I'm like, right. Did you try to kill yourself? Would you like to see a video of me in those spaces? Because I'm pretty sure that most people don't go there. They don't go there. By the same token, as you very, adroitly and perspicaciously observed, yes, it is intrinsically related to my ability to create and that which I see and that which I perceive. Virginia Woolf, who's one of my favorite writers, had bipolar, and it's so evident in her writing, and it's so evident in her memoir and her diaries. And you know why? When I first read her, I don't know how old I was, probably in my mid-teens. When I read her, I thought, oh my God, this is someone who sees the world the same way I do. This is it. She gets it. This is exactly how I see, feel, experience the world. Color, words, consciousness, family relationships, the time, whatever. It's exactly the same, this sense of, immense fluidity. and an overlapping, a multisensory overlapping synesthesia. I do have mild synesthesia. When I read certain words, I have a visceral feeling. I see colors and textures, and it evokes images, right? I know that not everyone has that, you know. So yeah, I mean, I can talk more about bipolar, but I think, and I'd be happy to. I think it's really, really fucking interesting about what it means about cosmic consciousness, the role of artists, creativity, the doors of perception, right? That valve that Aldous Huxley speaks about. The artist has a wider aperture, he says, that's allowing the mind at large in. That's what I have experienced when it's like, whoa, you understand more than the human mind is supposed to understand. It's beyond words, and it's too much. It's too much to integrate. And we live in a society that has no framework to even begin to support that.
Yeah. In terms of that valve, it seems from how you're speaking about it, it's almost like it's an open valve. And yeah, I agree 100% with the notion that society does have an issue in the sense that it doesn't make room for, or almost kind of pushes aside, these kind of things, and we don't really have like an infrastructure framework set up, or even education. And so I just want to thank you so much for even being open about it and being able to discuss from your perspective, because I think it's so important for people to be able to hear this coming from somebody who has these experiences, in order to help them get a more deeper understanding. Because from the outside, it's just people will hear what we read, or what
Yeah.
little limited information
It's
we
very
actually have access.
one-dimensional. It's very one-dimensional. And I think it's also thinking about like mental health, as if our mental health is separate from our physical, spiritual, and emotional health. It's not. We are whole, holistic beings. And how can you separate? Like, you can't separate the component parts of your life. Like, where are you living? What are you doing with your days? What do your relationships look like? How much money do you have? And I say money in terms of like, do you have independence? Are you safe? Can you get the right healthcare? Like that sort of stuff. Do you feel fulfilled? Right? It's like all these things are affecting us all the time. We all have mental health issues. It's just that some people can be categorized for whatever reasons. Yeah, because this is very complex genetics and nurture, and we don't really understand. But for whatever reason, some people, they fall into certain categories that mean that normal life can sometimes be more challenging for them. It can also be more fucking amazing. Most people are sleepwalking through life, and they're able to get up and get on, the underground and go to a job they don't really care about so they can pay their mortgage. I would rather shoot myself in the face than live that kind of life.
And I don't blame you. So I wanted to talk about plant medicines and consciousness. And I think I somewhere got the idea that you may be a fan of some of these healing modalities in regards to plant medicines. So yeah, what are your thoughts on plant medicines, and if you see value in these sort of experiences? And I guess this question is obviously kind of vague, because there's obviously so many plants and different medicinal modalities. So which is cool, because I'll just kind of let you maybe speak to what resonates with you in that regard, and if you've had any value that you've derived from any kind of plant medicines, maybe in terms of your own personal journey and approach.
Yeah. So with regards to how this relates to bipolar, my bipolarity, I'm on medication now. I'm back on it. I was off it for some time. I was like on it, off it, and then I was off it for a prolonged period when I was in Costa Rica, just to suss out my kind of resting state, if you will, right? And what was abundantly clear to me is that the mood episodes didn't stop. And it actually reached a point where I was suicidal again in November. And that's a big part of the reason I came back to England. I needed to stabilize. So I'm on medication. A lot of people, and I say that because, first of all, mental health and plant medicine like need to be spoken about in the same capacity, and specifically psychiatric conditions, right? And I feel like there's not enough of that happening. It's not for everyone. Again, just told you my brother has schizophrenia. He is not a candidate for plant medicine. I also know people, indirectly, like, ex-boyfriends, uncles, whatever, who took acid one time and then became schizophrenic. You don't know, it's like they are powerful medicines, and they demand infinite respect and a lot of caution and hyper awareness and so on, when talking about them and approaching them. I am pro them. I do believe they are a really amazing tool in our toolkit, but they are a tool in the toolkit. And again, and this relates back to the new age thing and there's a lot of people who rely on them a little bit too heavily, in my humble opinion, who do them frequently and then don't necessarily integrate what's come up. It's all in the integration. I knew people in Costa Rica who were doing ayahuasca twice a month. That's absolutely ridiculous. Really, like, that's not healthy. You're just actually becomes another way to escape. And then also to think that you're always, with Aya and the plant and this, it's like, dude, just fucking come back to earth. Like, come back to reality for a minute, I've not done ayahuasca. I have zero desire to do it because she doesn't call to me. It's a very intuitive feeling. I just don't think she's for me. Maybe one day she will be. I wouldn't be able to be on my medication and do that. So I don't really think I think it could really fucking destabilize me. I need to ground. My energy is like, fizzing all over the shop. I don't need to like blast into hyperspace. I need to ground my energy into the earth. So that's me. I do, and I've been open about this with my psychiatrist, and it's complex because it's still not legal. I just don't really care though. That I do work with psilocybin and LSD. I think they're incredible. And I've said this to my mother recently. I was like, you could really benefit from an assisted, therapeutically assisted journey with a professional. Have an amazing friend, Lindsay, who's in Canada, and she's coming on the show, my podcast, hopefully in a few weeks. Who she trained at the same university I'm going to do my PhD in, and how to assist people, with psychedelics. And this is happening. There's a third wave psychedelic movement happening right now, and I'm 100 million% behind it. I am so pro psychedelics because they give you a taste of the divine imagination. They give you a taste of what reality is really fucking like. They also allow you to go into your subconscious and therefore mine into your deepest, your blocks, your fears, your limitations. And I think this is why Terence McKenna, like, I have infinite respect for. I mean, what a G. He was so pro psychedelics, and I'm very much of his camp. Like, he did a lot more than I have, or I feel is necessary to do. But yeah, I believe they're going to be pivotal in the evolution of human consciousness. What's integral, though, is how we manage them. We need the wisdom to manage them and do it appropriately, safely, with parameters, and not in an exploitative capitalistic way, which I am seeing with, white males with, mushrooms. It's just, I'm so fucking bored of this paradigm. So yeah, those are sort of my thoughts in brief.
One of your recent casts that you did, that was an excerpt from one of the books. I think you're working on a book, and the subject was on being and becoming. And when it comes to truly identifying with concepts in terms of I am statements, for example, I can say I am a painter, I am a musician, I am happy, but I always liked I am becoming. And I think that the embrace to and of change comes easier to some than others, but I think that embrace can be somewhat of an antidote for many, as it seems it's not hard to look out into society and find so many systems of entrapment that kind of trap and lock the minds of people and really result in a sort of stagnation in terms of like starving out the potentials and any individual. in their true capacity to change and become, whether that's a religious trap, a cubicle work environment trap, or whatever. So yeah, I love meditating on becoming, and so maybe you could kind of just discuss a little bit of insight on being and becoming as you
Hmm.
see it.
Hmm. Thank you. And yeah, so the book I'm writing, that's the only book I'm writing right now. And just to give your listeners some context, it is uh, it's nonfiction, a narrative nonfiction book that is part memoir, so part deeply personal of my story of becoming, and then part like philosophy and cosmology. So I'm kind of blending science, mathematics, and philosophy, as well as like kind of my study of poetry and weaving many disciplines together to present an alternative story for humanity, which is the idea that this universe is not random, it's not purposeless, we're not here by chance, that there is a beautifully profound significance to our existence and it's waiting to be discovered. And this is what's going to enable the shift into the next sort of phase of human existence on this planet, else we will self-destruct, right? And I'm exploring this tension between being and becoming. So I'm an integral philosopher, and someone I look at a lot is Alfred North Whitehead, who spoke about process philosophy, this idea that everything is in flux. Now you can also go back to Heraclitus, who ancient Greece, he said you never step in the same river twice. It's this idea there isn't some eternal absolute order, right? That everything's actually in process and is in constant change. I and this is quite like deep philosophy, because then you can be looking at the idea of the Platonic solids, and is there some sort of eternal realm of the forms that is never changing and is perfect and hot, that would be like pure being, right? It's like outside of time and space, and it's this, right? Or is it all changing? And I believe in both. I believe they're both compatible with each other, because look at the nature of the universe. It's inherently paradoxical. Time is and it isn't. Like there's an amazing book called The Order of Time, which I highly recommend if your listeners are interested in this, by Carlo Rovelli, whose speciality is quantum gravity. And they found out on the quantum level, time doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. But yet we're living in time. What the fuck is time even? It's not linear. The moment you try and work things out with the intellectual mind of, well, this must be logical and rational, you can just forget it, mate, because the universe isn't logical, like according to that mode of thinking. The universe is, the universe is highly intelligent, but it's beyond our ken of understanding. The universe is more like a poem. And that came up in the spoken word, right? This life is like an artwork, like a poem made from free verse. That's how I see the universe, is that the cosmic mind, is literally writing itself or painting itself or composing itself in this very moment through each moment that comes to pass, right? And we're participating in that, and we are all part of that. Now, at the same time, despite this flux and becoming and development, I believe there's something beyond that. This goes back to chaos theory, that this cosmic mind, that everything's predetermined, even though it's not happened. So this is a paradox. This is, if people need to not try and like intellectually grapple with this, just let it sit with you and plant a seed. Everything is like pure potential and is waiting to unfurl and hasn't happened. And it's also all already happened. Destiny is real, but that doesn't mean we're on this like train track where it's all inevitable. It has to be actualized in the present moment for it to become destiny, but it's all already happened. Does that make sense?
It sort of does. It's just hard to explain that, which I think you do a pretty good job of doing.
It can't be
I
explained. That's the
I
thing. It can be
think
experienced.
somebody I really love listening to that kind of lends a lot of insight into this sort of thing is Alan Watts.
Yeah.
He's got some great lectures that kind of give you glimpses into that understanding, and he has a way of articulating things that it kind of soaks in, if you know what I mean. But
right. Well, it's that thing of it penetrates, it somehow penetrates the consciousness in a way that you don't need to have a full intellectual grasp of it in that moment. It's some meaning. Okay, this is important. Meaning is being communicated even if it's not fully understood, at least in that moment. Okay, T.S. Eliot said genuine poetry communicates before it is understood. Similarly, the philosopher Merleau-Ponty said knowledge is felt. I believe that we feel and understand through our intuition, or we resonate, like we feel and experience things on that sensorial level before our intellectual mind is able to start putting the pieces together. Like, that's how I understand it. So what I've just told you, yeah, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because look at the life that we live. We're born, we live, and we die. And everything ostensibly looks like cause and effect. But actually, when you start tuning in to a deeper truth, to a higher order, to a higher pattern, a higher reason and meaning, then watch the synchronicities happen. Then watch the premonitions happen. Then watch the telepathy happen. All these things that don't make sense start happening because they're real. Just because things don't make sense to your limited, tiny, finite human mind doesn't mean they're not real. What people need to do now at this moment in human history is open their fucking mind and let go of that which they think they know, and let go of the paradigm they were taught at school. And that doesn't mean of letting go of sense completely and thinking the earth is flat, because it's not. But it's about opening your mind to other possibilities and magic. Magic is real. This is a beautiful existence that we are literally dreaming into being. We are in some sort of weird visual hologram projected by the imagination of a higher mind, of which we are a part. We therefore have the power to create our own reality. And so that's what my book is really about, and how the individual journey of becoming, as we evolve, corresponds to a much wider cosmic journey of evolution as well.
absolutely, I love that. Yeah, I think some people, there's the trap of kind of getting caught up reflecting too much on the past or thinking too much in the future, when truly all there really is the ever present now. And I think once you kind of tune in and become more present with that and revolve your mental state and functionality around that notion, like you said, all that comes to fruition in terms of your greater awareness of isness itself. And I like that knowledge is felt. I think that is a truth. And yeah, in terms of things like thinking of things linear or logically, I think that's just one small intelligence among the vastness of the all. And so that was beautiful. I wanted to talk with you about the hilariousness of materialism. I think you're obviously very passionate about this, and I share a lot of your perspective on this. So yeah, if you could kind of give your little insight into that, that'd be great.
100%. Yeah. And what I do want to just caveat that with is that I am really passionate about it, but I'm like, with that passion is also a sense of lightheartedness, I feel. And also like lightheartedness, but like academic seriousness, it's like I grapple with this very academically, I'm open. I always try and engage if I'm having a discussion with someone, because a lot of these scientists who are materialists, like, I still have fucking massive respect for them. Richard Dawkins, for instance, who's like a militant anti-theist and who I used to love. I used to worship him. And then I had my awakening and everything changed. Like, I don't agree with a lot of what he says. I don't agree with his approach. I think it's quite limited and not that evolved. However, like, still massive respect to him, and what he's done. And to any person who's out there researching and contributing to academia, like, look at the technological advancements that we've had. Like, I respect materialism for what it was. But what I feel is that it was a necessary phase in our evolution. It's now run its course and it needs to be put to bed. Not completely, but like recontextualized within appropriate parameters so that it's not the governing paradigm that says this is how all reality functions and any other alternative belief system is therefore invalid. That's my big problem with it. Okay. And just to be really clear, materialism is the governing scientific paradigm or model of reality that says that matter is the primary reality, and that consciousness, therefore, which is obviously immaterial, is sort of an epiphenomenon of the brain. It doesn't really, it's just an illusion. They try and explain it away. They actually can't explain it, though, which is why it's called the hard problem of consciousness. If they could explain it and couch it within their model of reality, materialism wouldn't be up against it. But it cannot explain the very thing that allows us to be having this experience and considering this idea in the first place. It's absolutely absurd to say it's an illusion, and I think that's why I find it so hilarious. Also, the fact that 100 years ago or more, with the emergence of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, these discoveries and massive advancements in science, like it was actually put to bed then. Max Planck, who was, really not woo-woo, like such an important scientist of the 20th century, his conclusion after studying matter for however many years, 40, 50 years, was that matter doesn't really exist. He literally said that. He was like, after studying matter for however many years, I've come to the conclusion that matter doesn't really exist. And what it is instead, he said, is more like a mind. He called it the planum as well. This idea that it's the force that's holding an atom together is like an intelligence, because according to the regular like classical physics, it doesn't make any sense why an atom would be held together. There's some sort of force holding it together. And Max Planck said that this was a mind. Similarly, Erwin Schrödinger, who I'm sure everyone's familiar with, famous Schrödinger's cat, he said that the total number of minds in the universe is one. Consciousness is a singularity phasing within all beings. So many quotes from Einstein, again, who wasn't woo-woo. He was like, very much a scientist, but he also saw some sort of spirit, some higher force governing things that we don't really understand, but which looks more like consciousness than it does an impersonal machine, and which is what materialism says. It says that this universe is mechanical, it's random, it's cold, and there is no reason why we're here. And, another thing that I would put towards materialism is that they can't explain how and why life started on Earth. It's one of the big, cases I put against it. The idea that RNA, like amino acids, shuffled together over however many years and then just spontaneously became alive is absolutely absurd. If you look at the mathematical probabilities of this happening, I mean, it's so small. I don't even think it's like possible. It's like so implausible. It's laughable. Because the intelligence, you have to understand, the intelligence required to be alive, like the discrepancy from something being inanimate, like a rock, to having the motivation to self-replicate is so gargantuan, like it's hard to fathom, and that was this idea of vitalism in the 19th century. Many scientists were thinking there was this kind of vital spark, and Henri Bergson speaks about this, the Elan vital, and that was very, very, very dismissed, and now is seen as sort of kind of absurd to even reference that. But it's like, dude, life is driven by something. It's driven by a will. It's driven by a will to propagate. Why? And I think what's not happening, in today's culture is we're not asking the why questions. The why questions are the most important ones of all, because they take us back to the source.
Absolutely. Well said. This might tie in with the whole idea of the mechanical worldview. I'm not exactly sure your take, but it's always fun. This is just, I always like to ask people their opinion or their take on Elon Musk, because he's tied up in so much in the world. And a lot of people have different perspectives, and I'm just curious, what are your kind of thoughts on Elon Musk, the things that he's doing, and kind of what kind of ideology or philosophy do you feel that he holds, and is that something that's beneficial for humanity, or might it be hindering progression in some long-term view? Or yeah, just curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Um, yeah, interesting question. I think, in essence, how do I feel about Elon Musk? I'm incredibly intrigued by him. I am not intrigued by Bill Gates, for instance. I obviously Bill Gates is extraordinarily intelligent. I'm not intrigued by him and I'm not drawn to him. And we don't need to go into why. I'm just not. Elon Musk, I am very drawn to him. I'm very intrigued by him. I don't know exactly what to make of him. Haven't met him. I have a huge amount of respect for him, and I think you can think about him whatever you want. At the end of the day, the guy's created a commercial space company that's put rockets into space. Like, to be one individual and to create that yourself is fucking phenomenal. Like, what he's done and achieved as an example of what humans can do, I think is phenomenal. He's clearly a visionary, and has very, very big ideas. That excites me. Do I agree 100% with all of it? No. I'll tell you why. Okay. SpaceX going into space. Based on experiences I've had, and I don't necessarily want to go into it right now because that's a whole other podcast. But it's, in essence, it's about intelligent life beyond humanity. I know that, like, I'm pro interstellar space travel. Like, why not? I used to not be. I used to have the attitude of, we've got a beautiful planet here. Let's put all that money into fixing Earth. We can put money into fixing Earth and fix it and sort it out, as well as do interstellar travel. Like, we can do it all. Like, it doesn't need to be either or. However, what I'd say is that, the next frontier, it's not technology, it's consciousness, because consciousness is a field throughout the universe. It's a force in the universe like gravity. It therefore needs to be harnessed and synthesized with technology. Do you think we're going to go across space in like a rocket made out of? No. Like, other intelligent life, they are going from one part of the universe to another like that, and they're harnessing consciousness. Okay. And that's what I would want to sit down and have a chat with him about, is that there are untapped resources and ways that could quantum leap us, and how we get from A to B within the universe, and indeed why we're going from A to B in the universe, and what we're doing when we get there, and how do we prepare for what we encounter when we get there, right? Because it's like there's actually so much philosophical, ethical stuff that needs to be considered when it comes to, moving beyond the ken of our planet. So that's how I feel about him. I think I don't know exactly, because how can you ever really know about someone? He's obviously fucking intelligent and, potentially dangerous, because anyone with that much money and that much power, whatever he does, like, that's going to have a huge impact and huge ramifications across the earth. So that in itself is scary.
Definitely. Very fair perspective, I think. I wanted to get you to maybe talk about a couple of your favorite poets and why they are your favorite poets.
Sure. Well, I mean, I have to mention T.S. Eliot, of course. I talk about him a lot. I probably give him too much airtime, to be honest, but at the exclusion of other amazing writers who've informed me and influenced me hugely. But yeah, I do just have to say T.S. Eliot, because my PhD is about four quartets. Poetry is at the heart of my PhD. I am a writer before I'm a philosopher. I feel like words, language, rhythm, poetic beauty is the pleasure that art form gives me is hard to describe. It's moved me since I was very, very small. And has saved my life more times than I care to mention. When time's been really, really hard, it's in the great writers that I have found connection, meaning, understanding, and relief. But the T.S. Eliot, the influence he's had has been very, very particular to my academic thesis. And my personal journey of becoming. Everyone should read Four Quartets. It's a sacred text, as important as the Bible, a lot more beautiful than the Bible, and a lot less dogmatic. But like it contains the entire cosmos, as far as I'm concerned. It does. And that's why a lot of people find it very hard to understand, because it doesn't make sense. You know, it says the way up is the way down, the way forward is the way back. That's what the reality is like. That's what I said to you already. You know, time is and it is not. And the whole poem takes this kind of spiraling shape. And I believe that, you know, the spiral is basically the essential sort of structural framework of the universe. It's also the journey of evolution, isn't it? It's going up concentric circles of the spiral towards a unity point, which is sort of always out of reach, but, you know, beyond this dimension. So yeah, there's him. Virginia Woolf's not strictly a poet insofar as she wrote prose, but like her writing is so poetic. It's poetic prose. She is absolutely incredible for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Her sensitivity, her delicacy, the profound beauty. It's just so beautiful. You know, this calls into question, what is the meaning of beauty? I'm actually just going to pull here to the Lighthouse, which is, I think that's one of my favorite. This is one of my favorite books of hers. If you don't mind just giving me a moment. Okay. So this is from To the Lighthouse, her novel, which her novels often weren't driven by a narrative. They're more like expositions on consciousness. So this is from the middle part of the book called Time Passes. There's 3 chapters to the book, kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the middle bit is a very short, it's like only a few pages long, but it's 10 years, right? And the other 2 bits are a morning and an afternoon. And then the middle bit, which is the shortest bit, conveys 10 years. And she's very interested in the passage of time without human consciousness to perceive it. I just want to read you this little bit because this is something that when I read it, it could almost move me to tears with the sheer abstract beauty. But what, after all, is one night? A short space, especially when the darkness dims so soon, and so soon a bird sings, a cock crows, or a faint green quickens, like a turning leaf in the hollow of the wave. Night, however, succeeds to night. The winter holds a pack of them in store and deals them evenly, with indefatigable fingers. They lengthen, they darken. Some of them hold aloft clear planets, plates of brightness. The autumn trees, ravaged as they are, take on the flash of tattered flags, kindling in the gloom of cool cathedral caves, where gold letters on marble pages describe death and battle and how bones bleach and burn far away in Indian sands. I mean, like for me, just reading that, because what the fuck has that got to do with a narrative? It's not. It's a meditation on time, and it evokes some sort of dreamlike other place that doesn't make linear logical sense, but is beautiful. And I think beauty is one of the most intrinsic truths about the universe and why we're here. Yeah, hence why John Keats says beauty, truth, truth, beauty. He's another one of my favorite poets. The Romantic poets were very, very, very informative for me in my love of literature. I started reading them when I was probably about 11 or 12, and I was very taken with their love of nature and how that there was this rawness and this emotion and this sense of exploring altered states. For instance, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Kubla Khan, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Also, I'd like to mention Nabokov, who wrote Lolita, which is very famous. Again, he's not technically a poet, Russian-American author. He had synesthesia. Again, the way that this guy writes, it's like out of control. It's fucking out of control how beautiful the writing is. And I think that's what I miss so much in contemporaneous culture is reading like ridiculously beautiful writing. And it's what I aspire to, not like I'm trying to be anyone else, but the way I write, I know is poetic. I also know sometimes it's inaccessible. And I sent an excerpt of my book to my friend who's a literary agent, and she was like, well, I don't know how accessible this is for people. And I said to her, I was like, well, imagine telling Virginia Woolf to make her writing more accessible. And then she was like, well, yeah, that's why Virginia Woolf had her own printing press, which she did, which I think is quite funny. So I'm in this dilemma of, that which I offer, it's not pop. It's not average. It's not, I'm dancing this. There's a fine line I'm dancing, and I struggle with is how do I communicate with people in a way that doesn't alienate them, that can communicate really big ideas in a way that grabs people without sacrificing my artistic integrity and authenticity.
Yeah. Well, it's also it's not generic. It is authentic, like you said, which makes it of actual value, in my
Thank you.
estimation.
Thank you.
So you're into all things sacred. Your podcast is called Sacred Wisdom, and I love this word. After being immersed in the sacred for some time now, if you were to define in some way or just speak to the sacred in general, I'd really love kind of to hear what you have to say about it.
Thank you. Yeah. So this is the first time I've been asked this question after asking a lot of other people what they think about it, because my journey with the sacred and that term really began through my study of Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher. And this is when I was just beginning my PhD research, like four years ago. And up until that moment, I had never understood the word sacred or thought about it other than in the context of religion. I was like, religion is about the sacred, right? And I just didn't even think about it. And then I was reading Martin Heidegger and the way he was speaking about massive existential topics on the nature of being. He would use the word sacred, at least as translated into English, and the sacred entanglement. And it just really started resonating. I was like, oh my God, I started tuning into this pulse of something more than human that I had been so divorced from my whole life because it was not offered to me. And I was like, oh my God, that's what it is. That feeling when I looked up at the starry night sky and I felt awe and wonder and mystery, sacred. I was experiencing the sacred. It's sacred and it's mine. And I'm allowed to experience the sacred, even though I'm not religious. So that's where my interest in that term and that word and that concept came from. It was like a very genuine academic sort of and spiritual personal place. And I think the word sacred in certain circles can be a bit cliched. And I really want to, with my podcast, offer a meaning of it that couches it in ways that is like substantial and meaningful and beyond. Let's go back to the new age platitudes of that sacred. Like, well, what is the sacred? Because you can also differentiate between the sacred and the profane. I've had some people who, again, more like new agey, if we're going to use that as a really loose, in quotation marks terms, people who say everything's sacred. And it's like, well, I get what you're saying, because everything like is from the all, everything ultimately contains the presence of God, if you will. But also not everything's sacred. Like a plastic bottle floating in the ocean isn't sacred, is it? It's not. It's not. Is a woman being raped and beaten sacred? No, it's profane. And there's this difference between the sacred and the profane, and actually the etymology of the word sacred. I think it's in kind of Indo-Europeans. It means from to separate. Saka, I think it is. I don't have that exact detail to hand, but I think that's what it is. But it means to separate. So it's like separate from. So, there's a reason also why I think in terms of sacred places and spaces, which interests me a lot, why are certain places and spaces particularly sacred and have drawn people across the ages sites of reverence, sites of worship, Stonehenge, Glastonbury Tor. Like there's something energetic going on there. As Rock, Mount Shasta. There's sort of energy points as far as I can tell. There's something magnetic that draws people, also connected to wonder and awe. Of course, we make our own sacred places, which we then allocate as sacred, like a cathedral, Westminster Abbey, for example, which I love. That place has been there for 1,000 years. You go in there, you feel the resonance of 1,000 years of worship, of human intention, of consciousness, imprinted and embossed on the physical, tangible, like material place and space. It's like in the fucking stone. You feel it. Hence why old houses, I think, and I come from England, so we have a lot of them here. Certain places you go and you feel, if there's a good vibe or a bad vibe, if something fucked up happened there. Like that's a real phenomenon. I'm really interested in that. So, does that kind of answer the question, or is there probably more I could say?
Yeah, I mean, no, you describe it beautifully. I love it. I love just meditating and thinking on it. And I just really want to point people also to check out your podcast, Sacred Wisdom, because it really is phenomenal. And you have on some really amazing guests, and you guys get into some really good conversations about complex subjects that are typically not addressed or just kind of avoided because of the complexity of the subject matters. So I want people to be aware of that.
Thank
first
you.
and foremost, I want to thank you again, because this has been a very extremely enjoyable conversation for me. And if there is anywhere else you would like to direct people to check out you or your work or anything that you have going on, if you could kind of put that out there for everybody.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everything you've said. It's been a real honor and privilege to have someone ask me questions and let me sort of sound off. So, a lot of this stuff's in my head, a lot of the time. So that's been really great. Thank you also for referencing my podcast. I was doing it quite inconsistently when I was in Costa Rica because I didn't have the stability and the ground to do it. But now I'm back in London. I really have the wind behind my sails. So any listeners of yours who do check it out, they can expect a really regular and consistent output of content now, and including more solo episodes. So that's great if they want to check that out. And I guess also for me, because I've got so much going on now, like with my book and writing that, and a nascent PhD and other academic essays I'm working on, like I'm not doing so much, like, for instance, like blogging or writing in that capacity, but my writing, a small selection of writing can be found on Medium through my website. I'll give you my info. You can put it in your show notes maybe. And also if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Arabella_Thais. And I do like little videos and reels and things there. And I try and have a sense of humor about this whole fucking shit show of planet Earth.
Beautiful. Thank you again.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.
And therefore, there are heresies existing today which are persecuted in the same way as heresies were persecuted by the Holy Inquisition. And they are persecuted out of kindness, in exactly the same way that the Holy Inquisition persecuted heresy out of kindness and deep concern for human beings. That is unimaginable to us, but it was so. For after all, if you seriously believe that someone who did not hold the Catholic faith and who voluntarily rejected it would be tortured physically and spiritually forever and ever and ever in hell, you would resort to almost any means to preserve a fellow human being from such a fate, especially if the complaint or disease of heresy from which he suffered was infectious. You would first of all reason with him. And if he was not responsive to reason, you would resort to abuse and to forceful argument. And if he was not responsive to that, you would give him shock treatment and bang him about. If that didn't work, the thumbscrew and the rack and the Iron Maiden. And if that didn't work, as a last desperate resort, you would burn him at the stake in the pious hope that in the midst of those searing fires he would think better and make a last act of perfect contrition, and so be rescued from everlasting damnation. And you did all this in the spirit of this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. In the spirit of a surgeon who is very, very sorry indeed that he has to make you undergo this extremely painful operation. But it is in your best interests, and there really is at least a 50-50 chance that you may survive. And so, therefore, in perfectly scientific medical spirit, people may be very arbitrarily and without due process deprived of their civil rights, incarcerated in prisons that are in many cases much worse than prisons for criminals, and generally left to rot, be neglected and ignored, and when bumptious, given shock treatment or put in solitary confinement. For what? Because they have unorthodox and heretical states of consciousness. A lot of these people are not dangerous until provoked into being dangerous by being ignored, by being treated as machines, and in generally defined as non-human. And if you are defined as non-human, there's precious little you can do about it, because everything you say that sounds human will be taken as a kind of utterance of a mechanical man, as imitating humanness out of lunatic cunning.